Hello, crafty friends. My name is Jessica, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I have a card for you using some products from the December release of Simon Says Stamp, the Smitten release. And how I started this particular card is I went out onto Pinterest and I was looking for some color inspiration. So that was my little color card that I found, and here are all the colors I plan on using to go along with that. I'm going to first start off by doing a faux dye dip watercolor painting. This is where you start off with a really light color of watercolor and you brush it on in different layers. And as you do it, you shift down your brush strokes so that it looks almost like it's been dip dyed and it creates this beautiful gradient color. I went ahead and taped this watercolor panel. This is Tim Holtz Watercolors, my preferred watercolor to use because it's a nice bright white, but I taped it down to this wood panel using a low tack tape. I'm shooting for a color that's on the top of that color inspiration, so I'm mixing two of my Gonzai Tombi watercolors to try to get close to that top color. And it's just a matter of combining these two until I'm happy. And as you can see, I'm doing a little swatch there to see how close I've gotten. Once I have the color mixed, I went ahead and added water to each little puddle here that I'm making so that by the time I get to the last little puddle, it's the lightest that this color will be. I also do realize I think I have this Tim Holtz mixed media mat upside down because it's not the way I thought that the color would have been sitting on top. It is kind of dropleting up a bit much. But regardless, it ended up working out. So this first layer, I'm going to go all the way over really, really light. And then I'm going to take it away and use my heat tool to speed up the drying process. Typically, I like to let things air dry, but for this particular technique, it's better to use a heat gun so that you can make sure that your paint's not drying and then you're getting the correct color down as you go. Every time that I do pull the panel away, I am heat setting it. And at first, it doesn't look like I'm doing much, but I promise as I continue on, the layers will continue to get darker and darker. I will repeat this process probably another 6 to 7 more times before I have that gradient that I really, really want and that mimics that faux dip dyeing technique. Just wanted to bring it up to show you that there is actual color there. Sometimes my lighting in my craft room blows the color out a little bit too much, so it's hard to see. One of the fears I had when I set out to do this card was that I was going to run out of paint. And we'll see and hear in a little bit if that comes true or not. But it is one of the fears that I've had because I know you have to start with a very light color. And in order to get the color I wanted, I needed to make sure that it was saturated. So I had to start with a saturated color and then dilute it and then slowly come back to the fully saturated color. So it's a little bit different than some where maybe you start with one of those inkwells, you dilute it and then slowly add more color as you go. That would have been a little bit easier, but because I was looking for a unique color, I needed to combine them to get the one that I wanted. And so I am struggling here at the end, trying to pull up some of that color off of this mixed media mat to ensure that I'm fully covering this panel. Now, remember, I think I have my panel turned upside down or my mixed media mat. And so the color's drying really, really quick, which I found a little alarming, not alarming, maybe more just unusual. I wasn't having that expectation. So I think it's because I have it upside down, but I don't watercolor enough to really, really know. So we are learning this technique together. This is the first time I've ever done this, but I've been very inspired from other creators who have done this similar technique over the interwebs, and so I thought I would give it a try. And I knew going into it that mixing a very unique color was going to bring these challenges. I think if I had a crafty resolution for the 2024 year, it would be to use my watercolors. I fell into the hype of the Gonzai Tombi watercolor palette years ago, and it has sat a decent amount in my drawer. So this year I'm pulling out some of those not as commonly used craft items in my craft room and hoping to get to know them and get reacquainted in some instances and just really try to use what I have on hand. Now, as I kind of predicted, I did run out of color. So I'm pulling in this darker blue in hopes that maybe I could get that shift. I wouldn't have to go back and remix those colors. I could just get a darker shift towards the bottom. And so I'm adding another of these in hopes that that happens. And it actually ended up working really, really well. I didn't have to go back and try to remix that unique blue and green color. I left this part in here because there is something very satisfying about taking your tape off of a panel like this. So I thought if I enjoyed it, there's probably others out there that did as well. Now it's on to adding some dimension to these die cuts. I did push the color combo up there in the corner so you can't really see it. But what I did is I went and found some paper in my cardstock stash that matched the colors on that inspiration piece and went ahead and cut them out, couple different leaves and some of the flowers, and then found matching positively saturated ink to go ahead and add some dimension. Die cuts can be really flat when you just cut them out of paper, which isn't a bad thing, but I like to add a little more dimension. It brings a little bit more life to them. So here I'm adding the green to all of the leaves, and then later on I'll be adding some to the florals as well. This card is a little ambitious for me. I don't always make a lot of small die cuttings and, paper piecing. While I love doing it, it's not my typical style that you usually see. So I'm really happy with the way that this card turned out, and stretching my abilities where I can is always important to continue to be creative and increase my creativity in my craft room. Now, I can't talk about ink blending without mentioning this waffle flower grip mat. I absolutely love it for my ink blending. And I know some people don't like that it stains. I absolutely love that it stains. It means that I use it. It's well loved. It sees a lot of use. All of those great things. While I understand those who don't like it to stain, it just means that it's a happy tool in our craft room. I also love that Simon Says Stamp has 3 different sizes for their blending brushes. You'll see here the smallest one, but I was just using the medium size, which was great for these medium sized die cuts for adding color on. But there is a smaller one that you'll see when I'm using for the flowers, and then a larger one. It's just great to have all the different options. While they're not needed, it's nice to have all the different options for those who want to invest in these great tools to enhance your creativity. Now here I'm just adding on some purple. I don't know yet what flowers I'm going to be using, so I'm just picking a few different sizes so that I can have some options when it comes to building the card. If you're curious about the colors, these are positively saturated inks from Simon Says Stamp, and they are my favorite inks in my craft room. I recently posted a video where I take a trio of one of the sets, because each color comes in 3 colors, a light, a medium, and a dark. And I showed you how they blend together and then blended them with other colors from the line. Be sure to check out that video before you leave today, and just know that I plan on doing multiple trios here in the near future. Now for this darker purple, I wanted a different style of the florals, so I went for these tulipy buttercup shaped ones and went ahead and just added this dark ink to the bottom to give them that dimension. Since I did the other flower shapes for the light purple, I knew I wanted to mix it up and at least include this dark purple. And so that's why I did these different shapes, so that it helped me out when picking which flowers to put where. Now we're going to move on to this beautiful Merlot colored cardstock and this beautiful new Simon Says Stamp ink pad. This is some of their new lines that just recently came out. And I'm just trying to find a couple different styles in hopes that when I put this card together, I have everything that I need and I won't have to go back and re-ink anything in order to complete the card. Typically, when I'm doing any kind of ink blending, I like to dot off, and usually I have a paper towel that I do that on, or a microfiber cloth. But I was filming this when my kids were home on a snow day. And so I was trying just to lay this ink down as fast as I could and before the time in my craft room expired. So that's why you'll see I do it here on the mat, but usually I have a paper towel or a microfiber cloth that I do that on. Next, we're going to do a quick cleanup, and then we're going to kind of start building the card and making sure that I have all of the elements I need in order to move forward to completion. We'll also revisit that color inspiration that I found on Pinterest, and you'll have to let me know in the comments below how well I did on matching the colors. I'd love to hear it. This image is so beautiful. If plants really truly existed like this, I want one of them all. Like, I need all of these in my house. So one of another techniques I wanted to add was a tearing technique. And this was something that I learned very, very early on in my card making with a Stampin' Up! Class. When you want to create the best tear on a panel, you always want to tear towards yourself. While it feels natural to me, some might think that maybe tearing away from you would feel more natural, but you always want to tear towards you. It gives you that nice rough edge that you can see there. Now I'm adding some Big Mama foam tape because dimension is life, as Laura Fedora always says, and we want to pop this panel up. I didn't want to pop it up a lot because I love my Altenew foam tape, but I wanted to do just a little bit because we're going to be popping up all of the florals and the sentiment. So that's why I went with Big Mama foam tape, which has a thinner depth to it, and it's not quite as thick. I also find it very satisfying taking off these backings on foam tape. I live for it in the craft room. One of the things I forgot to mention was I did contemplate cutting this watercolor background panel down so that it would have a white border all the way around the outside. But I decided to keep it the full size of 4¼ by 5½, and I really liked that. I typically tend to do a white border because I feel like that makes panels pop, but I decided to go ahead and keep the full panel size on this. A great way to add strength and dimension to your die cuts is to cut them out of white or other colored cardstock multiple times and then stack them with glue to create almost a chipboard die cut. This gives the die cut some strength and stability, especially where this one has the gap in the A and the P. It's not fully together, welded together. So this helps keep it together and stiff when you're putting it on your card, but also gives it dimension without having to put a ton of tiny little foam strips on the back of it. I like to use my 110 Neenah Solar White for this to just give it that much more, but you can use 80-pound Neenah or colored cardstock if you had some scraps and you were okay with potentially seeing the color if you tip the card. Lots of different ways to do this. You can even use foam. If you can get the die cut to cut through the foam, you can use that as well. But I like to use cardstock. It just creates it and makes it a little bit more stable. I also like to use my ink blocks for putting pressure on die cuts to help them glue together. I very rarely use them for stamping, but they are an essential part to my craft room for ensuring that my die cuts are gluing together. So now this is me just fiddling. I am a fiddler when I am making cards, and sometimes it can take a long time. Sometimes it comes to me really, really quickly. But for this one, I am adding a little bit of glue to ensure that those leaves don't move when I'm building. And I love this Barely Art glue and this fine tip that it has. This has been the new go-to in my craft room. I still use Gina K quite often, but this one, when I'm wanting to just put a tiny bit of glue down, is perfect. So here we go with the fiddly bits. Is anybody else a fiddler? If you are, let me know in the comments down below so that I feel a little less alone sometimes. So for those of you who don't know, I have a bachelor's degree in studio art with a concentration on ceramics and painting, not watercolor. Like I mentioned before, I was an acrylic oil painter, but because of that, I bring a lot of that knowledge to card making on some sort of level. So in art, the rule of threes is a thing. It can be found in science and in nature all over. And so for this card, that's why I focused on having the 3 florals on the bottom and top, because there's just something about having 3 that's really appealing to the eye. And it's been told to me that it's because of how it occurs in nature. I think we officially have a layout. So I went ahead and committed to gluing the sentiment down. And now I'm just folding and kind of bending back the petals on the florals and laying them where I felt that they looked the best. I will be using some foam tape on some of these. I love this little foam squares. These are from Simon Says Stamp. They have two different versions. Well, technically, they have two different versions in color and two different versions of each color in size. So these are the ones that aren't quite as deep, and they come in white as shown, and they also come in black, which is really great when you're doing a black sentiment and you don't, or black die cuts and you don't want that white to show underneath. It's been really helpful for creating seamless cards. But I love the different versions in the depth. Sometimes I use a thicker foam tape on my panel and maybe a thinner foam tape on top, because there is a limit to the size of your cards when you're putting them in the mail. And so you want to be mindful of that when you're making them. You can also ask them to hand cancel, but sometimes it does cost more depending on where your post office is. I haven't had too many problems with my post office, but I have had one or two cards returned because it was too thick and didn't have enough on it. So I try to be mindful of that when I am creating cards that I know I'm going to want to send to somebody. To bring the gold full circle, I went ahead and added them to the centers of all the florals. For a couple of these flowers, I did use some of the thicker foam squares in order to push some up above others. I do like layering my die cuts quite a bit, and the foam squares do a really great job of ensuring that you get that layering of the florals like you would see in nature. You wouldn't see everything just glued on the same plane. And so I really, really like that. Now that's pretty much it. I did notice it needed a little bit more greenery there, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. But this is pretty much the card. Let me know what you think about this concept where I go and find a color card on Pinterest and design my card using that inspiration. I'm happy that you're joining me today, and I appreciate it. Be sure to go check out that other video I mentioned earlier about my ink blend trios, and I appreciate you stopping by. Have a great day.